And welcome back. Now, the South African Council of Churches has expressed disgust and disappointment over recent allegations of irregularities in the COVID-19 procurement processes at the Gauteng Health Department. At a meeting with its national church leaders, the council made a number of requests that it believes will put an end to corruption. And these include President Cyril Ramaphosa and government taking more action rather than merely condemning these acts of corruption. It wants arrests and prosecutions to take place swiftly in cases of fraud and corruption. Meanwhile, the president's spokesperson, Kusela Diko, and her husband, King Madzikane II, Thandisizwe Diko, have released a statement on the multi-million rand personal protective equipment tender, saying that they deeply regret their error of judgment. So to discuss this further, we're now joined by Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, who's the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. Bishop, always good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, ma'am. Great to be here.
So, Bishop, first and foremost, just looking at the latest scandal, and I say the latest because there have already been other procurement scandals that have raised the ire of many a South African citizen. But what is your overall assessment of what is going on, especially at a time like this when we're dealing with a pandemic and one expects leadership to rise above whatever differences they may have to serve the nation?
Sakina, there is a culture that has developed in South African environment, both in business and in government, that you cut corners, you make things happen. In fact, it does appear that there is a perception that if you want to make it big, take a tender with a government department where it does not matter what the markup is going to be. People inflate and increase prices just to make a quick buck. And I think this is what is bad in the South African environment. And so it's not even so much as corruption in the sense that you are flouting the procedures of accessing tenders. It is about the way tenders are designed to fleece the fiscus. And that is where the problem is, especially because during COVID, we have taken money we don't have. There's borrowings of money all over the world. And you borrow this money, but you don't want it to be leaking through into these feeding troughs of people that want to make money for themselves, because what that does is take money away from what it was intended for. What the effect is that someone might die because they don't have the appropriate attention that they should have had because the facilities are not there. You're going to have nurses and doctors that don't have PPEs, and therefore people die. So you can actually look at a situation where a relative of yours actually dies, and you're responsible for the death of that person because of what you did.
But if we think about it, Bishop, objectively, these are not by any means or any stretch of the imagination new behaviors that are creeping up. It's been there. I was looking at a tender document from one of the local municipalities and picked up on this very interestingly. Supply and delivery of 5 litre of paraffin, 1 packet of candles, that's 6 candles, it stipulates, 1 matchbox, like 10 boxes of matches as and when required. Now, how does one even begin to put that out on a tender? What is it that prevents this municipality from going and purchasing 5 litres of paraffin, 6 candles, a packet of candles, and a box of matches when they need it? So
you got it. That's exactly why we've said, look, we're not going to get into the whole tender system of the country over time, which we need to deal with. But we can at least say, in the COVID time, cut out the tender, cut out the middle person, go and buy that paraffin directly. There's no reason why you shouldn't. And so we're saying that in so many other, exceptions in the way the monies are used, one of those must be you don't do the tender, you buy what you need to buy. And make sure that it is transparent, it's on the website of the department, we know exactly what they're buying, and for how much and where, so that you cut out this whole nonsense of people that are COVID-preneurs. But there's something more to be said, Sakina. It is that society needs to participate. Mandela said it, that good governance comes because of the participation of citizens. And so we're calling for a citizen movement that will make it very difficult for the thieves to survive. You must, wherever you go, when you get into the lift, you must know that somebody is watching you. You must know if you turn your back all the time, there's somebody watching you. You cannot get away with it because the thieves are in our shop, in our homes, in our churches, in our pews. They are everywhere, and we know them. We know them. So when you know the person, make sure that this is uprooted. It's not going to happen only because government or somebody in government is doing the right thing.
So we can make that call, Bishop, all we like, but how much civic education has been done in South Africa, at least since the dawn of democracy? So how do we honestly expect people to hold leadership and government accountable when, number one, they don't know what their rights are? Number two, I've always said we are groupies to our elected representatives, and they are these celebrities. And how do you then hold the celebrity accountable if you are a groupie?
Well, you're hitting all the right spots, Sakina. Unfortunately, what you're saying is true. We have discussed this at the SABC, the church leaders, forum, and church leaders said, maybe we should persuade all churches to do their confirmation training to include democracy education. In other words, if you are preparing you to be a member or you be a person that owns the faith, which is what they do at confirmation, they get to a point where they take responsibility for the faith into which they are baptized. Some churches baptize at this stage, but what it does mean that this is when you become a conscious, responsible Christian. But you are a Christian in society that has got certain rules. So there ought to be as part of that, a training on what it means to be a South African citizen. What does it mean to be a Southern African citizen? Because our churches straddle the borders. And what does it mean to be an African citizen and a citizen of the world? So we think that must be, in fact, there is a program that's been developed for that purpose, particularly for youth development. And so we hope that if the state is not doing it, at least some organizations that have got a large presence in the country should do it.
But let's put the church in the spotlight for a moment. As an agent of a change and transformation, how would you assess the role the church has played? Has the church also not perhaps been found wanting in this regard and perhaps gone the same way as the citizenry into a deep slumber?
Yes, it has. It has. Well, remember that the church is society. I often say, if South Africa is 80% Christian, and if South Africa is wicked, it's evil, it's corrupt, the corruption is in our pews. And that's exactly the point we're making, that the corruption is not, we're not going to get, if you're pointing a finger at that, you've got more fingers pointing at you. And so that is true. And in fact, the way we approach this as the South African Council of Churches, we say our prophetic ministry has got three aspects. The first one is what we call truth to power. That's what we call the Elijah model, that you say you ought not to do ABC. That's one. But it's not all that is prophetic. The second one is the Daniel model, where Daniel, the Holy One of Israel, could not be consumed by fire, by lions. What did he do? He went on his knees to confess the sinfulness of his people. And we accept our sinfulness and that of our people because it is us. Thirdly, we then do what we call the Jeremiah model, which is where the man who, while the country was besieged and in kind of a junk status, what does he do? He buys a piece of land from his cousin as a statement and a symbol that they shall yet be cultivating and harvesting in this country. So we should do things that engender hope, that make people believe that actually things can be better.
Now, Bishop Mpumlwana, the National Church leadership have made a call. They've made a request that government deals with corruption, which would include the establishment of special courts for COVID-19 related crimes. But we've heard all of this from government themselves already. The criminal justice system, you're asking them to make arrests and prosecute people. But how would you assess how government has dealt with this particular issue to date? Because there have been so many reports already of fraud and irregularity reported at this stage. But how would you assess how government has dealt with it and how the president has actually addressed these issues to date?
In fact, we've been having these reports in different provinces. I mean, it's not just Gauteng. A number of provinces this looting is happening in all the provinces. And we understand that it's sort of almost people gear up for it in a meaningful way. They plan for it. And that's why we're saying that let's all report this together. Now, the government has not covered itself in glory. I mean, look at the Zondo Commission. Who is in orange overalls now? Nobody. And so that's why we're saying in fact, that statement, had in the initial draft had certain deadlines of our demands. We decided to withdraw that and direct that privately to the government so that we give them the deadlines and see how far they are prepared to work with us. But this whole thing of the Zondo Commission, I mean, it's been running for 2 years and we have seen so much, but we don't know why nobody has been arrested. And so it has not covered itself in glory, but what can we do? It has to be government that does this. One can't do this oneself. And so we have to keep knocking at the door, pressuring at the door, and maybe, just maybe, somebody will stand up.
Now, Bishop, when you say, what can we do? That sounds defeatist almost. So if leadership in our society, because the church provides leadership, as you say, the church is part of society, it is society. And if the leaders in society are asking, what can we do? What sort of message does that send to the citizenry? Because we are already dejected. People are already feeling hopeless.
The what can we do has to do with the fact that we cannot run the justice system. We can only pressure. So, and that's what we're doing. And in fact, as I was saying to you, we had actually put some deadlines, which you don't see in that statement because we removed them and said, well, before we publish the deadlines, we should talk to them about them. So definitely what we are doing is to put that pressure to say, in fact, someone is preparing a dossier for us of the specifics of the kinds of things we need to present to government of where is this, where is that, where is that. And so we're hoping that that kind of pressure, but it should not be the church leaders only. It ought to be a societal, and that's why we're calling for a movement of this. We will be talking to other organizations because you might recall that we did do this kind of thing, a few years ago in what we call the unburdening process. And you know what? When we did that, Sakina, that's why we called it unburdening. We were doing that so that Malusi or Sakina, who finds himself or herself in a situation where they have to facilitate what seems to be an inappropriate and irregular process, can have some place to go to unburden themselves and be able to, to release the information. We think that there are a lot of people that are pawns in a process such as this and who would be happy to be relieved by being given the space to say what is going on. So we want to build on that again because we know it worked in the past and we've got a lot of information. And we think that we should re-establish that, but this time it ought to be not just the church's thing, but so many more players so that we can draw in as many of the citizens as possible into the project.
But to what end, though, Bishop Mpumlwana? Because, as you say, this unburdening process, you expect people to come there and if they find themselves unwittingly caught up and tangled in some of these machinations that enable corruption, they would be able to come out and unburden. But does that mean that if we take the DIGO example, for example, as an example, is it enough to come out and say, you know what, I apologize, it was an error in judgment? At which point do you realize that there's a conflict of interest and you are doing wrong. Is it enough for people to come out and apologize?
Remember that the excuse me, the only way you can get to the bottom of any wrongdoing is if people that are involved in it are talking about it. And that's exactly why you had the Truth Commission, where people come and say what has happened. And so it is important to actually get into that. I mean, right now we're busy working on, we've just had the Timor inquest success. And the same thing is happening now. The other cases are coming up. You've got the Mohapi case. What do you need for that? You need people that were part of that process to say what happened, because without that, you cannot get to the bottom of it. And so it is important to create an unburdening process, because you create the space for people that want to extirpate that experience from and be able to, how you deal with them, then it becomes another matter. But you have to create the unburdening. And we would never have known the depth of the corruption in the past if we did not create that. And I know how much we were able to get and be able to pull and all the pieces and say, oh yes, here's how this adds up to that one.
So if we look at the issue of corruption in South African society, it is commonplace, it is endemic, it is systemic, it has become part of our DNA as a society, not only in politics, but in the church and just at a general level in society. So how do we deal with this as a nation? How do we rid ourselves of the scourge of corruption, Bishop?
You know, you said earlier that we do not teach about rights and responsibility, and that is true. We don't even have what an ideal South African should be like. I often hear people say, you know, what so-and-so has done is un-ANC. I'm asking the question, when are we going to say what Sakina has done is un-South African? What does it mean? What are the things that we frown upon as a society? Say, if you do this, you must know you are defining yourself outside of the ethos of this society. That's where we want to go. Because if you don't do that, I mean, it's worse. You might look at this at the national level. It's worse at the local government, like you were saying. It's worse the way the councillors function, and that is why councillors get killed. Because if one councillor stands up against it, that councillor gets killed. And so it's frightening. It's really wild at the local government level, and we are saying that every ward or village in this country has no less than 10 to 15 churches. And these churches are citizens of this local community. They are part of a community whose IDP they should inform. They are the same people who are going to go and pay for services that they should be paying for. I am told that here in Gauteng, in Soweto, the Council of Churches in Gauteng has been telling us this, that there are people who work for Eskom who will come to you and say, we're disconnecting unless you pay. And you pay to them. You pay them the money and they reconnect for you. So you've got a whole illegal industry that is associated with a service provider such as Eskom. And I do not know the full veracity of this, but that's exactly what the local churches are telling us. And I will not be surprised if there are churches that are buying electricity in that way as well. And so what we're saying is that let us deal with it at the local level, and let us deal with it at the provincial level, let us deal with it at the national level. It is going to need a concerted effort by all of us, but there has to be a campaign.
So just in closing, Bishop Mpumlwana, with what we are seeing at the moment and just focusing on COVID-19 and the 4 months that we have now had under lockdown, what would you say to government at this stage in dealing with corruption? What needs to be done, and what do we need to do as citizens to make sure that we emerge out of this better than we were going into it?
The few points that we put in our statement, the most important one for me is changing the procurement system. Because if you don't change the procurement system, you are not going to make a difference. I mean, that's why you're saying, they say to buy, 5 liters of paraffin, we have to change the procurement. There must be a way in which there is a special dispensation for procurement that protects the money of the people, especially because if it is not protected, our effort to save lives will be undermined. I think that's for me, that together with special courts and arrests, so that you clear messaging. There should be you should have the people in prison in the meantime while you are debating. They must say there's enough of on the surface, what they call a prima facie case, that so-and-so is likely to be guilty for this. Let's deal with them right now.
Well, Bishop Mpumlwana, thanks so much for your time this morning. Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana is the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, talking to us about their response to the allegations of irregular awarding of tenders by the Gauteng Department of Health. And the ANC's Provincial Executive Committee is expected to hold a media briefing that's today on its decision on this particular matter. It's time now for your latest news.